This is the Hireling Shepherd, painted by William Holman Hunt in 1851. It was first seen in public in the Royal Academy exhibition of the following year. Since 1896, the painting has been shown here in the Manchester City Art Gallery collection. And the room in which this and other Pre-Raphaelite works are now shown has been organized in imitation of a crowded Victorian picture gallery. But it seems to me that the addition of potted plants and inlaid chests suggests rather the environment of a 19th century drawing room. So this modern public gallery has been organized to recreate the atmosphere of a 19th century private collection. The Hireling Shepherd has now come to be seen by art historians as one of the most important examples of early Pre-Raphaelite painting. But during the second half of the 19th century, it was hardly known. This is because before 1896, it was part of a private collection, and therefore inaccessible to most of the art-consuming public. It had been bought in 1861 by James Leathart, a Newcastle businessman who owned a lead works at Gallowgate. At the time of his death, in 1896, Leathart owned one of the largest collections of Pre-Raphaelite painting in Britain. The Hireling Shepherd is one of several Pre-Raphaelite works, originally belonging to Leathart, which are now in the Manchester Gallery. Also in 1861, he paid Ford Madox Brown £150 for this painting, The Body of Harold Brought Before William the Conqueror, an unsuccessful entry in the 1844 competition for murals to decorate the new Houses of Parliament. In contrast, he also owned this wistful and rather sentimentalized painting, Autumn Leaves, by Sir John Everett Millais. And in 1859, he commissioned a replica of this large painting, Work, by Ford Madox Brown. But what can paintings like these tell us about the tastes and interests of a patron such as Leathart? Like many Victorian collectors, he bought almost exclusively from the work of living or modern artists. They could be commissioned to paint subjects which directly interested the patron. In the original version of Work, Madox Brown included a portrait of his wife, Emma, as the woman with the parasol. But in the smaller copy of this painting, which is now in Birmingham Art Gallery, Leathart commissioned a portrait of his wife, Maria. Madox Brown thereby gave the replica a special personal value for his patron. Work addresses a theme which preoccupied many contemporary Victorians, the status and function of different forms of work within Victorian society. The scene was based on the artist's observations of roadworks in a Hampstead street. Madox Brown provided a detailed written explanation of the picture in 1865. He described the physical labour of the British Navy as the outward and visible type of work. The navvies are contrasted with the middle-class figures of Carlyle and the Reverend Morris. He goes on, "These are the brain workers who, seeming to be idle, work, and are the cause of well-ordained work and happiness in others." In his book Past and Present, published in 1843, Carlyle had criticised the social relations in contemporary society. Carlyle elevated physical work to a worthy, almost heroic status. The handsome, industrious navvy, free of sweat and heroic in build, is a highly contrived image, an idealization of physical labour. As Leathart commissioned a copy of the original, I think we can assume he must have read the painting as a representation of attitudes with which he was in sympathy. Leathart himself employed a large number of lead workers, although their form of labour was rather different to Madox Brown's idealised image. At that time, the lead industry, and the production of white lead in particular, was notorious for its unhealthy working conditions. Lead poisoning was a continual hazard in an industry which employed a large number of women and young girls in poorly paid jobs, which involved sorting and carrying white lead. According to a contemporary report, however, conditions in Leathart's company, Lock, Blackett & Co., were slightly better than in other Newcastle lead works. The company was praised for going beyond the legal requirements by providing a free early breakfast for employees. It was believed that lead was less likely to be absorbed into the body on a full stomach. Leathart's attitude towards his workers seems to have been one of liberal paternalism, no doubt encouraged by his political support of the Liberal Party. The attitudes towards different forms of labour, which are represented in Madox Brown's painting, are given a religious association by the biblical quotations included around the frame. Leathart's identification with such attitudes is emphasised by the reproduction of a corner of work in this portrait by Madox Brown. Leathart's wife, Maria, had encouraged him to commission the portrait to celebrate his recently acquired status as managing director of Lock, Blackett & Company. The picture, finished in 1864, also shows the St Anthony's Lead Works, a profitable new site on the Tyne, in which Leathart had introduced new processes for the smelting of white lead. Leathart's industrial background, the direct source of a large part of his income, is deemed worthy of a painted record for posterity. It seems, however, that even Madox Brown, who espoused the pre-Raphaelite notion of truth to nature, found this to be an unflattering background against which to set his client. In a letter of 1863, he writes that Rossetti had suggested he should cover up part of the landscape with a flower on the window ledge. Madox Brown compromised by painting some leaves growing outside the window. Leathart paid 60 guineas for the painting. That's not a particularly large sum for a commissioned portrait. By this time, noticeable changes had already taken place in the traditional structure of art patronage. The growth of capitalism and the expansion of industry in towns in the Midlands and the north of England produced a new class of wealthy industrialist. Men like Whitworth and Armstrong, both from the Newcastle area. Their arms manufacturing business provided them with money to spend on building large homes and acquiring art collections. The popular view has tended to produce a parody of such figures, as uneducated bigots assuming the airs of the landed gentry. They are seen as self-made men mercilessly exploiting their workforce, on whom they seek to impose their own values. While there are aspects of this popular view which are based on historical evidence, the reality was a good deal more complex. Samuel Smiles, in his influential book Self-Help of 1859, celebrated the successful parvenu, the inventors and the industrialists who had risen, as he called it, from the people. While satirical artists such as Doré produced merciless caricatures of the ruthless industrialist, contemporary literature acknowledged different types of self-made men. The novels of Dickens, for example, reveal different or evolving images of the products of a self-help morality. Leathart has often been seen as typical of this new class of patron, but his background further confuses the popular image. Unlike Samuel Smiles' examples, he was not a first-generation industrialist. His father was a mining engineer, who is thought to have owned 2 lead mines. James had left Alston Grammar School at the age of 14 and worked as a chemist before being employed at the lead works. His father encouraged a program of self-improvement, which may have helped Leathart's rapid promotion within the company. In 1864, 6 years after his marriage, he bought this large pseudo-Gothic mansion, Bracken Dean, in the Low Fell area of Gateshead. It was one of several Victorian villas built for the successful middle class of Tyneside and Newcastle. Here the Leatharts reared a large family of 10 children, and James commissioned 2 family portraits from Arthur Hughes, celebrating the virtues of middle-class family life. In 1866, he painted Maria Leathart and her 3 children in idealized Italianate poses, representing Leathart's desire to project a respectable and cultured public image. And the purchase of Bracken Dean helped to establish this image. Here he had the space to display his rapidly growing collection of art and china. Despite his business successes and the apparent profitability of his company in the 50s and 60s, Leathart was not in a financial position to assume the airs of the landed gentry. Even the purchase of Bracken Dean caused some financial strain, although this doesn't seem to have affected the growth of his art collection. By the mid-1860s, this collection already included a large number of Pre-Raphaelite works. Several paintings, among them Madox Brown's Pretty Bar Lambs, had aroused criticism because of their ambiguous subject matter. Pretty Bar Lambs was painted in 1851 and later retouched. When it was first shown in the Royal Academy in 1852, it baffled some critics because it did not conform to their expectations of a meaningful subject matter. Many of the successful Royal Academy exhibits were based on historical, religious, literary, or moralizing themes. So in spite of its simple title, the Pretty Bar Lambs was thought to contain some more sophisticated level of meaning. Some critics identified a religious, even Catholic message. This was suggested by the Madonna-like pose of the mother and child, painted in bright radiant light, with a lamb close by. When the painting was exhibited in 1865, Madox Brown claimed it had been misunderstood and that people should not look for any meaning beyond the obvious one, that is, a lady, a baby, 2 lambs, a servant maid, and some grass. The 1852 Royal Academy exhibition also included the Hiling Shepherd. Superficially, the picture can be read as the seduction of a peasant girl by the Hiling Shepherd. In the exhibition catalogue, the title was accompanied by a song from Shakespeare's King Lear, which explained the general theme as that of the impending disaster when a shepherd neglects his sheep. But there was some confusion among critics as to what exactly the wealth of minutely painted detail was intended to symbolize, and what the religious message might be. The painting went into Leathart's private collection in 1861, so it was not until 1897, after it had entered a public collection, that Hunt provided an explanation of its intended meaning. He wrote, "The shepherd was
a type of other muddle-headed pastors who, instead of performing their services to the flock, which is in constant peril, discuss vain questions of no value to any human soul. My fool has found a death's head moth, and this fills his little mind with forebodings of evil. And he takes it to an equally sage counsellor for her opinion. She scorns his anxiety, from ignorance rather than profundity, but only the more distracts his faithfulness. While she feeds her lamb with sour apples, his sheep have burst bounds and got into the corn. It is not merely that the wheat will be spoilt, but in eating it, the sheep are doomed to destruction from becoming what farmers call blown. I did not wish to force the moral, and I never explained it till now, for this meaning was only in reserve for those who might be led to work it out. My first object as an artist was to paint, not Dresden china burgers, but a real shepherd and a real shepherdess, and a landscape in full sunlight, with all the colour of luscious summer.
Although this is a retrospective explanation, there were some critics who applied a similar reading to the work when it was first exhibited. On one level, Holman Hunt's picture could be identified with a dominant moral code perpetuated by the established church. It was even read by some as an attack on those who had strayed towards the high church. Leathart must have been familiar with the discussion the painting had generated when he bought it. It probably appealed to him precisely because of its moral and religious implications. The Highling Shepherd seems to have been of special importance to Leathart. He was particularly protective towards this picture, rarely lending it for exhibition, and later in his life refusing to allow it to be reproduced or even revarnished by the artist. In January 1886, Holman Hunt wrote to Leathart, politely requesting that he might consider lending the painting for a forthcoming exhibition.
I should rejoice very much to have it with the other pictures of that date seen in London, for many of the art public are now altogether ignorant of my earlier works. If you can spare the picture, I am sure that it will renew its reputation in London as one of the most thorough in its finish and consistency.
Holman Hunt clearly felt it necessary to exhibit the Highling Shepherd in order to sustain his reputation as a leading figure in the early Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Through subsequent exhibitions and his own writings, he promoted the painting as a key work of the movement. And this shift in the status and value attributed to the work was made possible by its removal from a private to a public collection. Leathart's collection combined this and other controversial examples of early Pre-Raphaelitism with works based on more conventional themes. He shared a Pre-Raphaelite taste for medieval and Shakespearean subjects. He owned Rossetti's Paolo and Francesca, and Maddox Brown's Lear and Cordelia. But Leathart was not exclusively concerned with Pre-Raphaelite works. He also bought and commissioned paintings from relatively unknown landscape artists, such as Bond and Watson. So what factors helped to determine Leathart's artistic tastes? During the second half of the 19th century, the middle classes of Newcastle patronised and promoted a local art scene, which focused on the Newcastle Art School and on local institutions such as the Literary and Philosophical Society. Leathart had begun collecting seriously in the 1850s. As secretary of the art school, he established a close friendship with the painter William Bell Scott, who was appointed master of the school in 1844. Bell Scott was associated with the Pre-Raphaelite group and encouraged Leathart's interest in their works. And after Bell Scott moved to London in the 1850s, he became a kind of scout for Leathart, recommending pictures he had seen and advising him on purchases. Leathart was a shrewd and careful negotiator. his negotiator. His purchases were often accompanied by sales of works from his collection, thereby reducing the cost of acquiring a particular painting. And it seems that at least part of the assets which allowed him the freedom to collect and commission works of art came from his wife Maria's inheritance. Her father, Thomas Headley, owned a successful soap manufacturing business. After the marriage, Headley and his family were frequently involved with Leathart in local business enterprises, such as the Tyne Steam Shipping Company, as well as Loch Blackett & Co. Leathart's marriage, then, helped to assure his financial and social status within middle-class Newcastle society. By the 1890s, he had become a respected local figure. He had been a JP for Gateshead and sat on the county bench. But he also had financial problems at this time. His company seems to have been making losses, and correspondence from the years before his death contained references to his attempts to sell some of his most valuable paintings, including the Hireling Shepherd. After Leathart's death in 1896, a sale of his works was held at the Goupil Gallery. The catalogue includes reproductions of a remarkable number of paintings, which have now come to be seen as important Pre-Raphaelite works. Initially, Manchester galleries seem to have shown little interest in buying the Hireling Shepherd. This was because they already owned a later work by Holman Hunt, The Shadow of Death. Leathart's protective attitude towards the Hireling Shepherd had kept it out of the public eye, and this had affected its relative status. But after Manchester Gallery purchased the work, it was frequently reproduced, and it was featured prominently in Holman Hunt's autobiography, published in 1905. The development at the end of the 19th century of large municipal galleries like Manchester provided artists with new opportunities for the sale and popularization of their work. And these new and changing forms of patronage affected the ways in which works of art were received. The history of the Hireling Shepherd illustrates this, for the status and value now attached to the painting have been directly affected by the different contexts in which it's been consumed. Yet we should not be affected by the different contexts in which it's been consumed. Yet we should not lose sight of the crucial importance of Leathart's patronage in the early creation and promotion of a market for Pre-Raphaelite paintings. Like many middle-class Victorian patrons, Leathart was attracted to works which conveyed moral or religious values, while seeming to be scenes of ordinary everyday life.